you have... Hi, good evening. You can put for... Good evening. My name is Dorcas Jalango. I would like to welcome you to our session. And our session would be on investing. If I can help everyone, it's just a long press on the white button. Can you hear me? Very well. Okay. I'm being told it's still afternoon, but it's also early evening. So yeah, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Dorcas Jalango. I work at the Alliance of Biodiversity and CSAIP as a researcher on climate smart agriculture. I would like to welcome you to our session. I will be taking you through this session on investing in climate smart agriculture for adaptation and mitigation and long-term planning. And the session is an interactive one, and it's going to help us to explore opportunities and lessons for enhancing the use of the Climate Smart Agriculture Investment Plan and their contribution to policies, the NDCs, and the low-term carbon development strategies. So to start us up, I'd like to welcome Patrick Kibaya from the Ministry of Agriculture. He's the head of the Climate Change Unit. He's going to take us through a 10-minute presentation on the Kenya Climate Smart Agriculture Investment Plan and how it has been used and the opportunities for enhancing and promoting its use in line with adaptation and mitigation goals. So welcome, Patrick.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? You know, I'm not hearing, but whether I'm so I need to have the, but if you can hear me, that's perfect. As you've been told, my name is Patrick Kibaya from Kenya. I work with the Minister of Agriculture and Livestock Development. I'm the coordinator of the Climate Change Unit. I'm also the coordinator of the National Climate Smart Agriculture Multi-Stakeholder Platform in Kenya. I want to take you through investing in climate smart agriculture for adaptation and planning for long-term low emission development. And these are the lessons from Kenya. Currently, where we are now in the program, we have already developed the Kenya Climate Smart Agriculture Investment Plan. And this provides a strategic and comprehensive case for investing in agriculture development, given the climate change and the variability which we are currently experiencing. The investment plan also addresses the adaptation and mitigation by fostering practices that build resilience in farming households while reducing the GHG emissions. Again, the investment plan also, upon development, will also set a pathway for sustainable growth through innovative and inclusive approaches, such as water harvesting, range restoration, climate resilient crop varieties, and post-harvest loss reduction. And then lastly, we envisage that the investment plan will also drive socio-economic development by enabling the smallholder farmers. As you know, the agriculture sector in Kenya is basically about 70% is done by the smallholder farmers. So the CSAIP is a tool for guiding investment decision in the sector. And in Kenya, we prioritize a set of 8 investment areas. And these ones include prioritized investments in 5 national scale activities and 3 targeting a few agro-zones. When you look at the ones in green are the ones which are targeting a few, not everyone in Kenya, but a few agro-zones. The first one, the dryland silio and pasture development. This will be basically implemented in the ASALs, mostly in the northern and the eastern parts of the country. Then the integrated soil fertility management. This will be implemented in the western part of the counties of the country, while the mangrove and the coral reef restoration and conservation will be for the coastal area in the coast region. Then the 5 national scale investments, we have the sustainable water harvesting, storage and utilization systems for crop production, for both crop and livestock production. Then we also have climate smart aquaculture and fisheries. These will be rolled out in the areas, especially in the REC region and the coastal area, and also where the farmers have access to water. Then the integrated agro-industrial parks for CSA development. These ones basically, especially in the livestock livelihood zones, especially for leather and also the abattoirs along the livestock value chain. And then we also have the climate smart dairy livestock systems. It's also another area which we're also focusing on. And then lastly, we also have the digital knowledge and the advisory services. This basically will encompass the climate information and also the digital services which the farmers can be able to access to improve their production environment. How does the CSIP align with the policies in Kenya? It aligns basically with the NDC, the updated version which we got in 2020, and also with the long-term low emission development strategy, the national adaptation plan, and also I've just picked some of these. Basically, the updated NDC, this is the primary instrument which aligns Kenya to meeting our obligations under Article 2 in areas of how we are going to abate. In Kenya, the figure which we've given is that we need to abate 32% of our emissions from as a country. You know that agriculture is the highest contributor of emissions in the contributing more than the 2%, but the biggest contribution comes from the livestock sector, which is giving around 53% of the same. Aligned to that is the long-term low emission development strategy, and this one outlines how, as a sector or as a government, we are going to upscore both the adaptation and the mitigation ambitions, so that we can be able to contribute to a low carbon development pathway. When you look at the CSP and the National Adaptation Plan, really now the NAP will give us the priority actions which, as a sector, we are going to implement so that we can be able to build resilience while contributing to sustainable production and reducing emissions from the sector. Then lastly, the Climate Change Act, which basically drives out how, as a country, we are going to manage, develop, and regulate the mechanisms for enabling us to develop in a low carbon trajectory, while also driving sustainable development. So it is well aligned with the national policies, and also other subnational level at the counties, where we are also cascading the policies to be able to align to the same. What is our experience so far? As you know, the investment plan, This was a joint initiative by the government of Kenya with the Alliance and the Kenya Climate Smart Agriculture Multi-Stakeholder Platform, among other stakeholders. So far, through the initiative, we have this has seen as a concerted effort through the Ministry of Agriculture Climate Change Unit and the CSAIP for impactful and efficient utilization of funds at the local level, and we have been able to pilot this in 4 counties. Again, also the initiative has also seen us build capacity of the CCU and the CSAIP core team in order to support the counties to be able to implement the CSAIP. Then the initiative has also supported the development of universities which have been identified in value chains in one initiative, an adaptation initiative, which is being implemented by the Ministry of Agriculture. We call it the National Value Chain Development Project. And CSAIP, this has been very critical in driving that process of supporting the development of then lastly, we have also, through the same, been able to support a proposal development to Green Climate Fund. It's also work in progress, but it is supporting the same. And it is hoped once this is go through, it will also be able to support the initiatives around the identified 8 investment areas. I'm being told that I'm running out of time, but I'm winding up. What are the opportunities we have in the CSA investments? We are saying that we have an opportunity to strengthen coordination and collaboration between the national and the subnational governments, also across ministries, private sector, CSOs, research and academia, the development partners, and other non-state actors on CSA and other resilient agriculture issues. And this one, we hope to be able to do it at the subnational level multi-stakeholder platforms. Then we also have an opportunity of creating and enabling a policy and institutional environment for the resilience of the CSA objectives in general. Then lastly, we have an opportunity of enhancing public-private partnerships to mobilize technical and financial resources to scale CSA and advance low carbon agricultural investments, fostering collaboration for sustainable growth. So basically that is what we've been able to do around this initiative in Kenya. And I wish to thank you for listening to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patrick. We will have a session of questions after the presentation. So at this point, I'd like to welcome the Ministry of Agriculture from Ethiopia. I'd like to welcome on board Mr. Adishu Negash, who is the coordinator at the ministry, to give us a presentation on the experiences of the CSAIP in Ethiopia. Welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Dorka. My name is Adishu Negash. I am working for Ministry of Agriculture as a leader for Environment and Climate Change Coordination Unit. We welcome you all on this side event. My presentation is on Climate Smart Agriculture Investment Plan, which is developed in collaboration with Ministry of Agriculture of Ethiopia, ABC, Alliance Biodiversity and the CSAIP, as well as ACRA. So I shall just continue my presentations. As we all know, this climate change impacts also affects all domain of human beings, especially this Africa, especially Horn of Africa also affected by this climate change. So we can just, as a government of Ethiopia, the government of Ethiopia also respond these impacts. We develop a series of policy documents, starting from 2011 from Durban COP. We develop CRG documents. It is a base strategy for all documents after that. We develop climate smart green economy documents. Then after, we develop also national adaptation plans. just on giving emphasis for adaptations and long-term low-emission development strategy. We can say like long-term low emission and climate resilient development strategies. And in sectoral, this is a national level policy documents, and at sectoral level in agriculture, we are also developing agricultural and forestry climate resilient strategy, which have 41 options of interventions. The other is we also developing climate smart agriculture roadmaps. Then after finally, we also develop climate smart investment plans. To just these all documents have just identified interventions, agricultural mitigation and adaptation interventions, but these CSAIP, climate smart agricultural investment plans, have an investment options and the business shows for those identified interventions. So this CSAIP helps us as just a business cases in order to just produce bankable project proposals to approach potential fund sources like GCF, JEF, Adaptation Fund, and Africa Development Bank. Last time, we developed 3 concept notes and submitted to 1 for GCF, 2 for Africa Development Bank. Now, one of them is just reached at the final stage for approval by African Development Bank based on this CSAIP. The main objective of this these policies are just to increase the resilience capacities of both farmers and the pastoralists, and to reduce or to limit our carbon emissions from agricultural food systems, and it have also economic and social benefit, and attract private sectors or any climate actors in order to implement on agricultural sector adaptation and mitigation interventions. The other thing is just this CSAIP have 7 commodities. We identified 7 commodities out of 19 potential CSA options. We used these 5 criteria just to select from 19 to 71. The first one is social benefit and the safety nets. The second is policy and institutions. The third is environmental integrity and sustainable development. The fourth is climate risk, productivity and climate resilience. The other is financial viability and private sector engagement. The main purpose of this CSIP is one is just to lure private sector engagement into climate actions. Just based on these criteria, we select 12, then also further we also prioritize 7 investment areas. These 7 investments, the first one is livestock value chain efficiency. Just we sort out from 19 to 7. These are 7 commodities which we just developing benefit cost ratios, and also we shows a business case to lure or to attract private sectors. The first one is livestock value chain efficiency. We are working on breeding, feeding and feeding system, enhancing livestock health, improving rangeland management, also including on this project summary 1. The second one is promoting small-scale irrigation, especially renewable energy-based small-scale irrigation in 9 river basin of Ethiopia. The other is improved forage production and improving feeding system also, another options. The other is animal genetics or improvement of animal genetics and enhancing animals health veterinary services. The fifth one is integrated soil fertility management. Just soil is a base for agricultural productivity, for forage and crop cultivation. So working on soil fertility is the main thing to sustain our agricultural productivity. And the other is strengthening knowledge and digital agro advisory services. And the last but not the least one is promoting climate resilience with productions in all agroecology of the country using small-scale irrigation. So how to this my country's progressing or proceed or advancing into enhanced adaptation, and what mechanisms will limit our carbons from our agricultural food systems. Things are here. The main thing just to advance or progress this climate smart investment plan is the mainstreaming of climate actions in development plans in both national level up to local level. The other thing is strengthening institution and the government structures is one thing to implement these agricultural sector adaptation and mitigation interventions, mobilizing finance and the technical resources also another thing. Just we get different trainings from different development partners through just how to just develop bankable project proposal and approaching potential fund sources. The other is enhancing institutional and technical capacity building, improving disaster risk management system, and ensuring equitable implementation and partnership, creating knowledge exchange platform. As a Ministry of Agriculture, we are establishing National Climate Smart Agriculture Forum. Development partners, government institutions, academia and research, and the private sector also a member of these institutions. So this institution also helps us just exchanging knowledge, creating partnership and collaborations. So the other is just improving private-public integration in climate actions. And the last one is enhancing multi-stakeholder engagement in climate actions. With this, we can just advance or progress into implementation of this CSAIP. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Adisu. Another round of applause for Mr. Adisu. So next, I want to welcome a representative from the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock Development in Kenya. And one of the goals, or rather the objectives of this session, was to officially launch our Kenya CSAIP, because we've started to use it and roll it out to the counties. And so we've been partnering with the Ministry of Agriculture. And at this juncture, allow me to welcome Mr. Bernard Kimoro, Assistant Director at the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock Development, to give us a keynote speech and officially launch our Kenya CSAIP. Karibu sana. A round of applause as he comes on stage.
Thank you very much, Dorcas. I hope everyone can hear me. Thank you. I want to say this, you know, when you are given a speech to read on behalf of somebody big, you think after reading the speech. That is what you normally say. So today I'm going to read a speech on behalf of our minister and our ministry. We were hoping that the minister was going to be here, or a representative of the minister was to be here. But unfortunately, or fortunately, they are working very hard, so they cannot be here with us. But nevertheless, I think we are here to represent the ministry and also give remarks about this very noble achievement that you made. I see colleagues from Ethiopia, am I right? Also from Tanzania. Do I see somebody from Tanzania? Any other country, which is Zambia? Zambia. South Africa? Any other country? Okay. So please allow me to make the comments of our ministry, and thereafter then we can have a short discussion. So ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, partners and colleagues, all protocols observed. It's an honor to stand before you today at this critical moment. As we gather here at COP29, our collective resolve to combat climate change and secure a sustainable future for generations to come has never been more important. Today, I'm especially proud to launch the Kenya Climate Smart Agriculture Investment Plan, a bold step forward in aligning our agricultural sector with the realities of a changing climate, while unlocking opportunities for economic growth, food security, and sustainable development. Climate change is no longer a distant threat. It is here with us, affecting every aspect of our lives. For Kenya and East and Southern Africa, fraternity at large, and the impacts are deeply felt. Erratic weather patterns, prolonged droughts, and extreme weather events have tested the resilience of our farmers, threatened food security, and placed undue strain on our socioeconomic systems. Yet, amidst these challenges, Kenya has chosen a path of resilience and innovation. We recognize that agriculture, as the backbone of our economy, must not only adapt to the changing climate, but also lead in mitigating the impacts. Our Climate Smart Agriculture Investment Plan is a cornerstone of this vision. It aligns with Kenya's adaptation and mitigation strategies, with our nationally determined contribution, our Vision 2030, which is a national roadmap, development roadmap, the global frameworks, like the long-term low-emission development strategies. This investment plan will address a number of aspects. One, it addresses the adaptation and mitigation by fostering practices that build the resilience of farming households while reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It sets a pathway for sustainable growth through innovative and inclusive approaches such as water harvesting, ridgeland restoration, climate-resilient crop varieties, and post-harvest loss reduction. It also drives socioeconomic development by enabling smallholder farmers, the heart of our agricultural system, to thrive under changing conditions. Kenya's journey is not unique and is part of a regional initiative. We stand shoulder to shoulder with Ethiopia and Zambia, facing similar challenges and sharing the same aspirations. Both the countries have demonstrated that there is power in collective action and knowledge sharing. Collaborative platforms, both nationally and regionally, underscore the importance of multi-stakeholder engagement. They remind us that no single actor can solve these challenges alone. Governments, research institutions, the private sector, development partners, and local communities must all play their part. This session, therefore, is a timely opportunity for reflection, dialogue, and action. I look forward to the insights and exchanges that will emerge during this session. Let this be the beginning of a renewed commitment to climate-smart agriculture across our region, one that transforms challenges into opportunities and drives us towards a sustainable, low-carbon, and climate-resilient future. Thank you, and may this session inspire meaningful action for our shared future. Asanteni sana. What is that? I'm told I'm supposed to be launching this book. So one thing I wanted to say, and this is something that we also have in our negotiation, a lot of regions have their own approaches in terms of dealing with the issues around the impacts of climate change and also mitigating the greenhouse gases. For Kenya, we have embraced what we call the climate smart agriculture. And it doesn't mean that we have left out all the other initiatives. We hear there are initiatives such as regenerative agriculture, agroecology. Yeah. If you go to South America, you'll hear something like farming God's way. Yeah. So there are many, many initiatives. But we are saying in Kenya, we embrace all those initiatives within this particular approach that we are calling climate smart agriculture. Yeah, so nobody should be left out. It's very important for us to be able to say that. So in our negotiation, actually, we are talking about which topics to discuss. And if it is about climate smart agriculture, we need to actually indicate it is all about all the approaches that will bring sustainable production, climate resilience agriculture in our different countries. So with those many remarks, I think it's my honor and privilege. Do I say to launch this particular document? Is it officially launched or it was officially launched?
The official launch is coming.
So the official launch is coming?
Yes.
I'm told there are no balloons, eh? Yeah, but so it's my privilege and honor to launch this particular document. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can you hear me? So thank you very much, the Kenyan delegation, for that. I'd like to usher us into the second batch of this session, where we'll be having panelists from representing the three countries, just to learn about the experiences of how we can align the investment plans to the policies on low carbon development and also adaptation, and also look at how we can foster public and private partnerships to enhance the use and implementation of the CSAIPs. So I'd like to welcome on stage 4 panelists. So Lydia Kimani, who is from the private sector on agribusiness from African markets. Banu Asefa from Ethiopia, representing the Scala project in Ethiopia, which is currently exploring to use the investment plan to guide the implementation of the interventions. I'd like also to welcome Mr. Morton Mwanza from the Ministry of Agriculture in Zambia, Chief Horticultural Officer and also negotiator. And lastly, I'd like to welcome Juma Ignatius on stage from PowerShift Africa, and currently he's a designated Senior Climate Adaptation and Resilience Advisor for the Climate Change Kenya Envoy. So welcome on stage, karibuni. So welcome our distinguished panelists, and in the next like 20 minutes, we'll be having a brief discussion on 3 key items. 1, how can the CSAIPs effectively support the implementation of the priorities within the policies, like the NDCs? And 2, the experience and the lessons from individual countries on how the CSAIP can be replicated across Africa. And lastly, how we can engage the private sector. So firstly, I'd like to open the stage for reactions and comments and discussions on how the Climate Smart Agriculture Investment Plan can support implementation of the NDCs and the LTD-LEDs and other climate adaptation policies across Africa and also nationally. So over to you, Lydia. I'd like to start with you.
Good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much, Dorcas. So for me, my understanding and experience with the CSIP is that it helps especially very vulnerable communities, which is what we have in the agriculture sector, especially women and rural women. So you find that for you to access climate finance, you need to very well outline the climate rationale. This has been a very big challenge, and that has been our experience in the Kenyan context. But when you look at the CSIP, it has already lifted a lot of the weight by dealing with the complex issue of outlining the climate rationale. So by having that as a tool in and of itself, very vulnerable communities now don't have to go through the rigor of now identifying the climate rationale, because it is very well spelled out, and this is through the climate risk profiles. In our country, we have it at the national level, so we have a climate risk profile for the country, and at the sub-national level for all the sub-national county governments. So these now, and you find that agriculture, like it has very well been said, is the backbone of our economy, supporting close to 70% of rural populations. So you find that if we have this kind of information available, then it enhances the access of climate finance, promoting productivity, reducing emissions, and ultimately enhancing resilience, not just of ecosystems, but even the livelihoods of the people that are involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. Ignatius, do you want to weigh in?
Yes, so good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Juma Ignatius, of course, coming from the Office of the Climate Envoy, specifically looking at the question of adaptation. Maybe just to begin off first is to appreciate the fact that for a long time, as we all know, adaptation has always been sidelined when it comes to multilateral negotiations. So even in terms of funding, there's been like low and low funding going to this side. In fact, in policy rooms, people call it the middle ugly child in the negotiations. So there's low funding because of that. However, I think this plan presents a very good opportunity, first of all, in terms of getting resources. But again, also before I go back to the main point is that to try and see the linkage between adaptation and mitigation. For a long time, I think people try to see them as separate items. But if you look at them critically, they're like Siamese twins. They speak to one another, that if you achieve one, you can achieve the other. And also why they are complementary in some sense, that you cannot be able to adapt in a world that, for example, is over 3 degrees Celsius. So reducing emission becomes a key priority for every part of the world, not just Africa. But at the same time, it also helps enhance adaptation initiatives. So that's why for me the CSAIP's approach is one that is timely and one that kills 2 birds, I think, with 1 stone. But maybe also to take it down to Africa, is that the African continent has been losing 34% of its agricultural produce, and this is according to the IPCC, thanks to climate change impacts. So again, the question of how do you reduce emissions and how do you help farmers adapt, to be able to ensure that they get more and more resources in their, from their farms, is very, very critical. And then tied to this, and like our sister said, Africa, most of the countries, they claim or say around the world that our economies are much dependent on agriculture. So if agriculture is impacted, it means that the economies are dying each and every day. And of course, again, this is coupled by the population of the continent, that by 2050, statistics show that 4 in every 10 people that will be meeting, 4 of them will be from Africa. So of course, investing in agriculture that is smart and meets the needs of the people is very, very critical. So the question is, how can CSIPs be able to, how can the CIP effectively support the implementation of national adaptation and mitigation goals outlined in policies like NDCs and LT-LEDs? So in my thinking, I was thinking that 1, it can be through alignment with national climate goals. That CSIP should be designed to align with specific adaptation and mitigation targets set in the NDCs, but also the LT-LEDs. In this instance here, this includes prioritizing projects that contribute to both mitigation and adaptation. So in mitigation, you look at projects that are supporting carbon sequestration, but again, in adaptation side, you look at climate resilience, for example, crops. How can they be able to live? So how would we plant forests, for example, and plants at the same time and achieve the 2 results all at the same time? Also, the CSIPs can ensure that climate-smart agriculture initiatives explicitly support sector-specific targets in agriculture and forestry, but also land use. And then to add to that also, the other element is that CSIPs can be able to ensure that this target resource allocation. So as we all know, again, most of the economies that we have on the African continent have less resources, but with such plans, you can be able to ensure that you allocate your resources in accordance to the needs that are there, and also in a targeted approach. And of course, this ensures that there's efficiency, but also the resources that you have are maximized. So CSIPs can identify and channel investment into high impact areas that directly contribute to NDCs, but also the LT and of course the LED goals. So for example, improving agricultural productivity, enhancing water use efficiency in agriculture, scaling up renewable energy use in farming systems. And again, here you can look at the issue of solar-powered irrigation systems. And third, and the last point, because of the time, I think that these plans can help promote the private sector engagement, especially in the agricultural sector, where we see that it's the backbone of the economy. And again, it's been said here that 70% of agriculture in Africa comes from smallholder farmers. So how can you be able to also to call in the private sector to invest in such a critical sector and be able to help spur some of the economies of many African countries? And of course, there are many ways how this can happen. One is developing bankable climate-smart agriculture projects with clear co-benefits in terms of mitigation and adaptation. And then, of course, also incentivizing the private sector through climate finance mechanisms such as the private-public partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ignatius, for the wonderful insights. And you spoke of the private sector. So I'd like also to hear from you or hear your thoughts on how the private sector can be effectively engaged to scale the CSAIPs and mobilize resources for low carbon agriculture investments. And I'd like to request maybe Banu to bring from the private sector. How do you think we can enhance private sector engagement to scale the CSAIPs?
Okay, thank you so much for having me. I think this CSIP can bridge the private sector engagement and also enhance public-private coordination or integration for the implementation of climate action. One, when we are thinking about the investment of private sector, the issue of risk transfer of managing of the risk is one of the critical area. As you know, agriculture is the risky business. In this changing climate, we have to have the risk transfer mechanism or de-risking de-risking for engaging the private sectors in the implementation process of the climate action. The other one is investment is very important because this is a climate smart investment plan has been identified the investment required for those identified climate action, how much we require to invest in order to implement those climate actions. This can help the private sector to know the amount of investment required, and they can also identify that project or the area they are going to engage is economically feasible or not. I think this CSMIP come with that investment that can encourage the private sector engagement. The other one is the Climate Smart Agriculture Investment Plan. Categorizing the priority climate actions in the context specificity based on different agroecological zonation. This can guide the private sector where they are going to implement, which type of activity they need to implement in what agroecological zonation or livelihood system. I think this can help the private sector to engage in the implementations of priority climate actions. Those has been identified in NAP and NDC. That was high level, just it is the list of actions, priority action, but this CSMIP is coming with the context specificity. This lead the private sector in which agroecological zonation and farm system going to engage. I think it can bridge the priority climate action identified in the policies and the private sector to enhance the implementation process of those climate action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bran. Any more insights? Morton, would you want to add something about the private sector engagement?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think one thing usually which we tend to overlook sometimes is when developing these documents, sometimes we don't tend to involve the private sector from the onset. And we want to engage them when the document is ready to buy in our document. I think we need to engage the private sector as we develop these documents so that they also have an input and see where they can buy in and where they can invest so that we move together as we start the implementation itself. And also, we need to create some incentives, I think, to the private sector as they engage in the climate smart agriculture projects, so that as they engage, maybe some tax incentives from government to help them and encourage them to participate in implementation of some climate smart agriculture project in the country. For example, maybe we can have some tax waivers on some agriculture machinery or some sort of thing which will promote the implementation of these climate smart agriculture practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Morton. Before we go to the last question, Lydia, do you want to aim in on the private sector? No, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dorcas. Maybe a perspective that I'd like to also bring to our attention is that the private sector in African countries is informal. So a lot of them, while they may be aware of the opportunity, may not be in a position. So there is that need now for the multi-stakeholder approach, for instance, like we have done in Kenya. It enhances the coming together. Then from there, it also now creates a platform where you can disseminate this kind of knowledge. And the private sector in the context of agriculture are the smallholder farmers. So you find that we also now, it creates momentum for things like aggregation. Another thing that has also been an incentive and where the CSAIP can be applied is also we are, like in the Kenyan context, we see a lot of trade agreements between our partners that have climate change components. So this is an excellent application of the CSIP. I'll give an example with the EU. They are very keen on having goods that have a very low carbon footprint. So this gives momentum for the uptake of the CSIP to help the agriculture sector not only just become resilient, but contribute to the development objectives. Because there is an incentive, like Morton has indicated, because the EU market is willing to pay a premium for goods and services that are have a low carbon footprint. The other one has been the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, where all of us as countries represented here are members. So this is one of the things that we have also been very keen on as the private sector, even in Kenya. Can the government pursue prioritization of commodities that have a low carbon footprint in the AfCFTA as a way of creating demand for climate smart agriculture goods? So by extension, in so doing, we create the demand for the use of the CSIP and enhance access to climate finance that now very well enables the sector to plug into these kinds of new opportunities. We have also seen trade gain momentum right from Dubai. We had a trade day. This year we had a dedicated session, and we have the Big Fit, the Baku Investment, Climate Investment and Trade Initiative. So these are some of the things that are gaining momentum, and I believe they could give impetus into the uptake of the CSIP going forward, and especially for African countries. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Lydia. Thank you, Morton. Lastly, in 1 minute each, I'd like us to highlight the lessons or experiences from our individual countries that can be replicated across Africa to mobilize resources for the CSAIP and also achieve low carbon development. So just in 1 minute, each of us, I'd give the platform for us to give some of the experiences from Kenya, Zambia, and Ethiopia that may be good practices that can be replicated in other countries across Africa. So Morton, I'd start with you, and then up to Lydia. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think when you look at, for example, Zambia, we have a number of organizations just apart from the government who are implementing the climate smart agriculture practices in the community. And basically what we observed is that if we are not coordinated, I think the implementation becomes complicated and we end up sending different messages, different concepts to the farmer. In the end, the farmers get disturbed and confused. So what we did as for Zambia, we facilitated the formation of the Climate Smart Agriculture Alliance, and this has brought together a number of both local and international organizations into the alliance, and they are able to coordinate the implementation as civil society with the oversight from government to ensure that they are in line with the government policies which are existing, so that we don't divert and we don't replicate or duplicate the interventions with the community. So that's one of the big lessons we've learned, that coordination is very important as we address issues related to climate change, especially through the climate smart agriculture. Thank you.
Yes, maybe for the case of Kenya, I can speak about presenting climate smart agriculture as an adaptation solution. And here is through also linking it with the local context. So integrating the local context as part of the solution. And essentially here, this means that we've been incorporating indigenous knowledge and practices into CSIPs, which has proven to be very effective in designing context-specific intervention, particularly for the problems that people face in the different countries that they operate in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I think one of the experiences I was going to share with you is when we are thinking about mitigation or in the adaptation of climate action is focusing on actions or activities. Those have the transformation potentials. We need to move from incremental. We need to go to the system transformation is very important. We have to think at that level. When we are implementing or identifying priority climate actions, we need to identify at the system level and also need to consider the subsystems. Those have the positive contribution to each other. Then at the end of the day, we can attain the transformation at landscape level, maybe at the watershed level. At the end of the day, that is grow up and we can bring transformation at the national level. I think this is integrations of priority or complementing climate action can bring transformation. I think the focusing on actions, those have the transformative capacity is very important. Other one is after we identify this transformative climate action, we need to mainstream into the existing government plans, programs, and increasing the partnership of the all stakeholders to engage in the implementation process. If once we identify the action and this and otherwise, the participations of all stakeholders is very important. I think this is the way we can withstand or reducing the impact of the climate change in agriculture sector. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dorcas. So I will be sharing on the Climate Smart Multi-Stakeholder platform in Kenya. And this has been an initiative of the government to enhance reporting and also coordinate implementation of climate action in the agriculture sector. However, it brings on board both the private sector, both levels of government, and even the civil society. So one of the things that has been an innovation in and of itself is the development of the CSAIP. So the government has championed this, and the MSP, the multi-stakeholder platform, is actually anchored in policy to ensure that the sector is consistently and continuously reporting. Over and above that, agriculture is a devolved function in our country. So it means that a lot of the functions happen at the subnational level. Again, when you look at climate change adaptation, which is a priority for our country, happens at the grassroots level. So when you have the multi-stakeholder platform cascading at the subnational level, then leveraging on the partnerships like CIAT and the MSP, where we have innovative tools, using that cascaded model to the grassroots, we are able to bring research and farmer linkages, bringing tools that can enhance access to finance, and therefore not just contributing to climate change resilience building, but also the development goals. And this is something also that has been very well encapsulated in our adaptation commitment of the NDC. And this is now also being replicated in the third generation of the county integrated development plans, which are the subnational development plans for all our 47 subnational counties. So this is something that we feel very strongly that especially the aspect of anchoring in policy, like Morton indicated, because the government legislates in the interest of the public. Therefore, it is able to give very good oversight and ensuring that everyone, the efforts are concerted. Finally, the MSP has also brought an innovation where we have seen different government ministries coming together. So with the MSP, we have the Ministry of Environment, we have the Ministry of Trade, we have the Treasury, and now we are able to have the tools such as the CSAIP accessing facilities like the financing locally led climate action, an initiative of the Treasury with the World Bank, but is directly benefiting the agriculture sector. So these are some of the things that we feel if we scale up, then we give Africa a chance at building resilience, bringing transformation in agriculture, enhancing food security, and ultimately driving development. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, our panelists, and thank you once again. A round of applause for them. Thank you for the meaningful insights, and I'd like to usher you to your seats. So, thank you. We are moving into the second session, the second part of this session, sorry. Just to let you know that the CSAIP and the Long-Term Low Emission Development Guide were a product of the ICRA project, Accelerating Impact of Climate Research, CG Climate Research for Africa, ICRA. And we've had a presentation on the CSAIPs. I'd like to welcome AGNES. Sorry, not AGNES. So I'd like to welcome Romy. Romy is a climate policy researcher under ICRA, who also was played a very significant role in the development of the guide. And so she's going to take us through a 10-minute presentation of how the guide was developed and what are some of the goals and objectives and the priority areas it's looking at. So welcome, Romy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorcas. And good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for your attention so far. And we're taking a slight pivot in the agenda to go back a little bit to speak about long-term low emissions development strategies. So we've all spoken about the climate smart agricultural strategies and practices that fit into these longer term frameworks. But I'm going to give a quick introduction into what these LT-LEDs are all about, why they are important, and to essentially launch again in person this guidance tool that we've put together, which I'll introduce in a little bit. Okay, so just a little bit of framing, and I can see we've got lots of policymakers and lots of country representatives in the room, so you're all very familiar with these frameworks. So it doesn't, is there a clicker? Is this the clicker? So I know many of you won't necessarily need a big introduction into them, but essentially what, so George, most of you will know George from AGNES, George Wamakoya, who's very passionate about long-term low emissions development strategies. He speaks about the climate rationale and the scientific rationale behind them, but we know essentially that in all the conversations that we're having to date, we're looking at the long-term temperature targets. So I'm not going to go into detail in this, but we always look to plan for the longer-term future. And so if we look at projections going into the future, we always know that essentially what we are doing to date and the actions that we are putting in place are not enough, and there's emissions gaps. Okay? We obviously know this, and there's no point in going to this. This is an image from the 1.5 degree target from the IPCC Global Warming Report, which essentially again looks at these longer term visions of how to limit global warming, the 1.5 degrees target, and you'll see looking at the drastic cuts that are needed to happen immediately in order to get us to a longer term vision. I also want to just highlight that within the Paris Agreement, there is a call for all countries to start planning for a longer-term future. So you can look. I've just pulled out the articles and the paragraphs just to show you kind of the impetus and rationale that's included in the Paris Agreement around longer-term futures. So you'll see here, for example, Article 4, Paragraph 1 introduces the concepts of net zero emissions, carbon neutrality, as per the IPCC Special Report on 1.5. Article 4, Paragraph 4 speaks about developing countries being encouraged to move over time towards economy-wide emission reduction targets. And Article 4, Paragraph 19, which requests all parties to strive to formulate and communicate long-term low greenhouse gas emissions futures, mindful of Article 2. Okay, so just to set that out up front. And there's lots of policy instruments that our countries are using to implement this, our adaptation and mitigation goals, and we have a lot of conversations in these COPs around our NDCs, and we're obviously in the next iteration of negotiating more ambitious NDCs. But what we don't speak a lot about is our the formulation and development of our long-term low emissions targets. There's a little bit of a strange naming because people call them different things according to the country. So in short, some people say long-term strategies, LT-LEDs, long-term emissions development strategies. Other countries put climate resilient in the naming. But anyway, essentially to say that they all mean the same thing. And some of them, they're voluntary commitments, unlike the NDCs, which are mandatory. And the framing depends on the country, like the NDCs, but the target is to 2050 or to 2060, dependent on the country. And these complement, obviously, other climate policies like the NAPs and others. So long-term strategies, there was a request by the UNFCCC for long-term strategies to be handed over by the end of, well, before this COP. And very few countries, and I'll go into the numbers now, have managed to achieve that. I think 73 countries globally have managed to hand their long-term strategies into the UNFCCC, or that they're available on the portal, and there's reason for that. But essentially to say many of our countries are in the process of working on these documents. It's not an easy feat. Planning for the longer term comes with many challenges, and so countries are busy with these documents. And as I mentioned, they're planning instruments that look at the whole of an economy, the whole of society approach. And what they do is that they essentially use the building blocks of the NDCs to plan for a longer term future. Or anyway, that's what they should be looking at. They're living documents in that they should be revisited. South Africa's long-term strategy, for example, came out in 2020. We're one of the few African countries that have a long-term strategy, and it's currently being revisited because clearly things evolve, science evolves, and targets change. They need to include, because they're all of economy, they need to include just equitable and inclusive transitions, so for all sectors of the economy, and that's where we'll go into now. The agriculture sector, all different industry sectors will be relevant to these long-term strategies. And there are also private sector entities and non-state entities that are putting together their decarbonization frameworks. Sorry, going the wrong way. Oh goodness, sorry. All right. So there's a clear reason why planning for the long term makes sense. I've put some of the reasons up here, but what is really important about these documents, and this is all providing the reason why we have a technical guide on it, but essentially to say these documents are really important. They set a policy direction, a pathway, and a clear vision of which our countries should move, in the direction to which our countries should move. They help us to coordinate an economy-wide response to climate change, both from mitigation and adaptation perspective. They help us avoid investments in stranded assets. So by setting a clear vision on a low carbon, low emissions future, they help us avoid high emissions technologies and other stranded assets that might not be useful by 2100. They should support adaptation responses and resilience building broadly. They should help us plan for sustainable infrastructure in light of obviously climate risks. They help us increase financing that's consistent with longer term timeframes, and they also send predictable signals to the investor community and to other actors that want to be involved in the planning of these societal documents. And they, at the bottom you can't see it now, but they help us to promote and coordinate new partnerships. So those are the reasons why we should have them, and I think we all know that now. As I mentioned, so to date, I think I took this off the portal last night, 75 countries have submitted their long-term strategies to the UNFCCC. You'll see Nigeria at the bottom there, having submitted its second iteration in April. And I think Equatorial Guinea. I think Kenya's a little bit, I think anyway, we can hear from Kenya, but I think the planning is there, but it hasn't necessarily, yeah, it's the draft. So officially, it's only 9 countries in Africa that have submitted to the UNFCCC, although Kenya's obviously made a lot of headway. So what we've done, and this is obviously led by AGNES, and we will hear from AGNES in a little bit, in partnership with the UNFCCC regional centers in Africa, along with ACRA and other entities, we put together a technical guidance document to encourage countries to move forward in the formulation and development of these strategies. So what it does is essentially it was a demand-driven document in that countries requested ideas around how to progress, looking at some of the steps and the phases and the processes that it could use in terms of developing these documents. And it draws a lot on best practices of the countries that have completed their LT-led strategies. It looks at the countries in Africa, and it adopts the best practices from those countries in order to help other countries make headway. So obviously I'm going to encourage you all to read it. You can speak to me afterwards if you need access to the copy, but we have some hard copies for the lucky few, but I'll also give you the online link. But essentially it divides it into 4 phases, and clearly these processes are completely robust. I mean, they need a robust and comprehensive activities attached to them. But essentially the guide breaks it up into 4 phases, right from the inception and scoping and what you need to even start these documents. And it speaks about institutional arrangements, coordination mechanisms, scoping in terms of what exists in terms of technical and financial resources to even start these processes. Then it speaks about visioning, which is obviously a very important component of getting a participatory visioning process and in figuring out where you want to go to from a collective societal perspective and what you need to get there. And obviously participation is essential in this. And this is what's important for the CSA conversation we've had to date, is that this vision needs to incorporate all sectors. So generally what countries do is they start with a sectoral vision, which many of you have been talking about in your CSA planning. Sectoral visions, and all these sectoral visions come together and they culminate in a longer term societal vision. And then you'll have a scenario development and analyses phase, which has other steps, and then obviously preparation phase, which includes M&E, resource mobilization, investment plans, etc. So I'm not going to go into this because this is a good reason for you to go and have a look yourselves. And as I mentioned, it looks at many case studies from countries in Africa that have been progressive in this area. Ethiopia, there's a lot of examples from Ethiopia, there's a lot of examples from South Africa, from Kenya, and other countries, so in the different areas and steps. So I encourage you all to read it. This is my email address if you can't get yourself a copy or can't find a copy. But otherwise, please, I encourage you to all have a look. And especially member countries and policymakers that are undergoing this process, please have a look that all the steps that you are looking at are incorporated. So things around stakeholder engagement, participation, mapping, etc. might give you some ideas. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Romy, for the wonderful presentation. Before I give us a platform opportunity to weigh in your insights, and if anyone has anything else to add that would be interesting for us to know of or learn from, I'd like to welcome Ruth to give us a few insights on the LTD-led guide that has just been presented here. And Ruth is the NDC country facilitator for Kenya. So I'd like to welcome her to just give us a few talking points on the enhancement of the LEDs and the guide and how we are envisioning to use it in future. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well? Good. Yes, my name is Ruth. I'm the NDC in-country facilitator for Kenya, and I'm also glad to have participated in this process together with Romy and the team. And I want to sincerely thank AGNES and the regional UNFCCC regional offices and other partners for this guideline. It's not the only guideline. We also have other guidelines. You can check the Climate Promise. The UNDP have also done a guideline on the LTLEDs. There are other guidelines that we can borrow from. But for Kenya, we really wish this had come earlier before we had done our LTLEDs. So I do appreciate the value of this guideline, and I'm going to share our insights as a country, what we saw as the opportunities to leverage on the experiences of other countries to develop further our LTLEDs. Let me also reiterate the other colleagues. I really like the way this session was organized. We had CSA experiences. You know, we have investment plans in agriculture, and what a sector, because agriculture is a mitigation sector and also an adaptation sector. It's a very critical sector for us to learn from. So I see LTLEDs as the biggest opportunities for countries to look at investments in the country. And what a better way to look at the granular opportunities when you look at an investment plan. So listening to Ethiopia and also to Kenya on their investment plan, I look at it and I tie it very well to what the LTLED should be. It should provide that granular analysis, but more importantly, the costing of the interventions, both the mitigation and adaptation of interventions. And this is also a very big gap. We are trying to do that in the country, and I will share our case. I mean, we had consultants supporting us in this work. If it's not really anchored within the methodologies of a country, you run into a problem where you are not able to utilize the LTLEDs and its investment plan usefully as a country to inform policy direction. So this is one thing that I recognize, and also it builds into the other point, which is leadership by government in developing the LTLEDs. This is being a long-term plan. It needs to be anchored very well within the relevant departments, specifically the ones responsible for economic planning. And I also want to stress that it's useful to use the macroeconomic projection tools that the country uses when you're setting your baseline. Why? You need ownership. So for us to be able to marry the LTLEDs and what we call in our country the Kenya Vision 2030, we need to see that the BAU communicates the Kenyan context and it's realistic and it's also relatable and it's what we have in the country. Otherwise, then you have two parallel documents that do not speak to each other, and you cannot be able to defend the direction that the country wants to take in terms of investment planning. So the leadership of government is important, but also I want to talk about mitigation modeling. When you're doing your mitigation analysis, and this was also something that we saw from many countries, we did not factor in the peaking of emissions, which is very, very important for developing countries. Actually, Article 4 of the Paris Agreement recognizes that for developing countries, we will take longer to peak our emissions. So why is this important? As a developing country, we need to be as realistic as possible and say, by 2030, we will need to have achieved first our development goals, but then how do we go in this way in a low emission development pathway? So this peaking of emissions need to be factored in modeling the mitigation section of the LTLEDs. And also in setting the baselines, we need to be realistic. We are developing countries. Our emissions, we contribute less than 4% of the emissions globally. So we need to set baselines that are also a bit realistic and not talk about 2010 emission levels or 2005 emission levels, well comparing the other countries. So if we say as a country, Kenya, 2010 our emission levels were barely 50 million tons of emissions equivalent. Where was the UK in 2010? So these are things that we also need to be a bit more realistic when we are setting the LTLEDs baselines. I want to mention that as the NDC partnership, which I work for, we are supporting a couple of countries to develop their long-term low-emission development strategies and also their NDCs. We have a global call called the LTLEDs and NDC Global Call, where we invite countries to submit requests. And this goes through the country focal points. We have, for instance, in our country, we have 3 focal points, one at the Ministry of Environment, one at the National Treasury, and one at the Economic Planning Unit. So the country, if you need support with setting up the technical expertise, with recognizing the stakeholder engagement process and the costing of the LTLEDs, we are inviting countries to submit the request to the LTLEDs NDC global call. It's unfortunately closed for this year, but we will start again in 2025. And so far, we have received requests from around 75 countries, 60 of which are requests to support the NDC 3.0. So we are also inviting, if you're in this country, if you're in this room and you've not finished the development of your NDC or you need support, reach out to your focal points or the NDC in-country facilitators and submit a request. It's a 3-step process and very easy. You would submit what we call a screening form. It's basically an online form that you mention what are you requesting for, what is the cost of the amount you're requesting for. Then we will invite you to submit an RSF, a request for support form. And then we circulate this to all the partners, and the partners are able to provide either the technical support or the financial support that you need as a country to be able to develop your NDC and LTLEDs. One other case that I can mention in terms of aligning NDCs and LTLEDs, it's really, really important to realize that as developing countries, we can leverage on the LTLEDs to ensure that our NDCs are also investment tools. And this is one thing that we've done. So for instance, our LTLEDs is up to 2050, and our vision for development is only up to 2030. So beyond 2030, we do not have a development vision. So what we agreed as a country, in order to ensure that there's that alignment, we are leveraging on the draft, it's a draft LTLEDs, identifying the interventions for mitigation and adaptation we have between 2030 to 2050 to identify milestones for implementation between 2030 to 2035 for the new NDC process. And this is really good, but it can only happen if the government is leading the process, is identifying with the LTLEDs and the modeling of the LTLEDs, and is also able to resource mobilize for it. I like the question that we were talking about, private sector, onboarding private sector, how do we bring private sector, and how do we use the LTLEDs to identify investment opportunities. Yesterday I was in a discussion, again, another side event of business networks. And one question that was sent, it was a panel of business networks from South Africa and the Global North. one question was asked, for the agriculture for adaptation sector, how do we incentivize? And none of these colleagues on the panel was able to really give specific investment incentives that they're using in their countries to finance adaptation, water sector, agriculture sector. But I like that we have opportunities that have been communicated on this panel, and I'm liking that in our investment plans for agriculture that have been showcased, we've already identified opportunities for private sector to actually come on board and finance the investment planning. So it's a good thing to have an LTLEDs. It's a positive image for the country to have an LTLEDs. It actually allows you to even also get more partners joining you as a country. Though we've not submitted an LTLEDs as a country, we always think Kenya is one of the countries that has done LTLEDs. And we are aiming that now that we have a guideline, we are going to revise it to make it more realistic and more useful to the country, and also to the country, and also to onboard more partners in our sectors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. In the next few minutes, I'd like to give a platform to our audience, to our distinguished audience. You've been listening for, I think, the past 1 hour, 15 minutes or so. Anyone who has any question, any further input, anyone who'd want to weigh in on our discussion from experiences in your organization, from your experience in your expertise or field of work. So I'd give the next 3 minutes to anybody who wants to. Okay, thank you. So can I see the hands? 1, 2. Okay, sure. 1 minute, please.
I'll try. Thank you. My name is Susan, and I'm from Uganda. Maybe I'll keep the introduction to that. Thank you so much for sharing all this. I want to go back to the first speakers. I think Kenya and Ethiopia emphasized an opportunity, which is coordination and collaboration. Now, we find this mentioned, communicated, repeated in many spaces, and I find that sometimes we do not get to the granular details of the how. And on the panel, somebody did give an example from Zambia of what they have done by creating a space. So just to contribute to that is that I think we need to be very intentional or risk this opportunity being a tick box exercise, which then doesn't become effective and especially not sustainable. And in doing all that, we also have to be aware of not projectizing the process. Otherwise, once a project facilitates it and it doesn't build in, how do you move on beyond the project? Then we see it as business as usual. It collapses at the end. So if we can continuously share experiences of what is working and also learn from what is not working, that is important. And as the second thing that hasn't been talked at length about is the opportunity of the digitization processes, and it has also been, it was mentioned by, I think, Kenya and Ethiopia. Just to say, I come from Uganda, yes, that there is that type of private sector that is providing solutions to the actual farmer using digital means. They actually are not looking and using these policies that we are drafting, partly because they are not being consulted at the beginning. I think one is to identify them as critical players in the private sector space, engage them, learn from what are they learning, what is working and what is not working, and be intentional in reducing those barriers that remain, because digitization is a very important tool in moving climate-smart agriculture approaches forward. Finally, indigenous knowledge. Let's build on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the wonderful insights and further input. And that's well noted. Though we didn't have a lot of time to go in depth in this, when you look at our investment plan, there's a specific investment for knowledge and advisory, where we look at the climate information services and the digital tools that can be used to enhance this. And also for the stakeholders, the collaboration. I just want to weigh on that. I think 2 months ago, we did a forum for Zambia, Ethiopia, and Kenya for their CSA multi-stakeholder platforms, and did exchange ideas, actionable ones, that can be used to enhance collaboration, not only nationally, but also regionally across East and Southern Africa. So yeah, thank you very much for the insights, and we look forward to enhance on that as well. Very valid points. Prof, 1 minute.
Thank you very much. Let me begin by appreciating our presenters, especially the last team, on the low emissions and climate resilient development. I think that's a platform that brings climate action and sustainable development into one thinking. I think that is very critical, and therefore we must think about how do we operationalize the LT-led, because it calls for, one, the inputs into particularly the visioning. How are we envisioning the future in the context of the dynamics within the climate risk? That calls for a lot of investment, especially in the climate information services. I think that's where we have hope. And we have been brushing the socio-economics. I think that we need to really reprofile the socio-economic data, because climate information data itself is not sufficient for us to have a holistic view of what we envision in the future. Secondly, I want to appreciate Morton. You brought in the private sector perspective. We have CSA technologies and practices which don't seem to be working, calling for innovations, right? That presents an immense opportunity for the private sector. The public sector cannot lead the innovation pathway. It is only by the private sector who have the resources to even catalyze the small startups that can easily evolve into the technologies that, or innovation, sorry, that we require. Finally, there was a mention of transformation. To date, do you think we have enough evidence to make us talk about transformation? Are we running two streams of conflicting narratives? We are talking about transformation, at the same time emphasizing indigenous and local knowledge systems. What happens? I don't know. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We are coming to the end of our session, and to wrap it up, I'd like to invite Dr. David Awolala, who is the Director, Climate Policy Center at AGNES, just to wind up for us the session and give us some key takeaways and also some key lessons that is worth carrying home to our individual countries. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. Firstly, I want to thank ICRA and also CGIAR, Alliance for Biodiversity, in working with the African Group of Negotiators Expert Support to develop this technical guide. It's been really insightful. Our presenters and speakers have said so much about the usefulness of the technical guide. And few key takeaways that I would like to mention are just from the scientific aspect and from the policy angle. Firstly, climate smart agriculture investments has strong significance towards meeting the goals of the ETILETs and as well as meeting NDC targets, and because it set pathway to achieve 4 main objectives. Firstly, it enhances resilience of the food production sector. It provides opportunity for sustainability of the agriculture subsector, but it also has potentials to contribute to mitigation and adaptation goals, meaning that if we invest in climate smart agriculture, it well aligns with the climate goals that are set in the LTLETs and NDC. I've been able to see about 5 key areas that I've been mentioning. Firstly, it creates opportunities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, which investment in climate smart agriculture can support countries to meet up with their emission reduction targets. And secondly, it focuses on building more resilience in agriculture. It promotes sustainable agriculture and food security because it can lead to transformed food systems to create more sustainable, low-carbon economies that ensure food security for all. But beside that, we know that investing in climate-smart agriculture also has some cross-sectoral benefits because there are a lot of interactions between the agricultural sector and the energy sector, the water sector, also biodiversity. All of these are contributing to the broader climate goals that are shifting towards energy transition or decarbonization of the agriculture sector. So investment in climate-smart agriculture are central to both the adaptation and mitigation strategies that are set out in the NDC and ETILETs. And so if countries continue to invest in these practices and technologies, it helps to bridge the gap between short-term climate action and long-term development plans by ensuring to have an agricultural system that are both climate resilient and low carbon. From the policy aspect, sectoral strategies like this, for example, looking at the miniature investment in climate smart agriculture can bring together many stakeholders to work together to form a kind of a systemic alliance that can assist to contribute to meeting the target set in the NDC. So ETILETs should be developed with foresight and analysis of future trends so that we capture variations from present into the future. And this can be used to set our country on the right track to achieve these long-term goals. We are encouraging countries to have ETILET plans because it will help them in setting intermediary targets in their NDC. So within the African context, countries who doesn't have ETILETs currently, they've been encouraged to approach AGNES and the team, ICRA and CSAIP, with the technical guide to assist. But then, currently we are working with the French version of the ETILETs so that countries within the Central African bloc who are a bit lagging behind can also have some of the technical opportunities for them to be able to have access to the guide. So on this note, I congratulate the organizer of this event, Laura, and your team, and also AGNES for making it happen. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your valuable time. And I hope to see you next time. We've come to the end of our session. Thank you.